For decades, a cigarette wasn't just a habit. It was Hollywood's ultimate symbol of cool that on the silver screen, stars like Bogart, Wayne, and McQueen made smoking look effortless, seductive, even heroic. It was a ritual of power and mystery, a visual shorthand for confidence. But behind the scenes, that same seductive symbol was quietly destroying the very icons who made it glamorous. This is the tragic story of 11 legendary Hollywood actors whose lives were consumed, quite literally, by smoke. Their rise to fame was spectacular, their falls unbearably human, and their final days a haunting warning from an era that confused image with immortality. That if this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. 1. Humphrey Bogart, the tough guy silenced by cancer. He was the face of classic Hollywood masculinity, sharp suits, sharper wit, and always a cigarette smoldering between his fingers. Humphrey Bogart wasn't just a star, he was an archetype. From Casablanca to the Maltese Falcon, his smoky drawl and world-weary charm defined a generation of men. But off-screen, that same cigarette rarely left his hand. Bogart smoked constantly. Friends said one burned out only when another was lit. In 1956, the unbreakable icon of cool began coughing between takes. The diagnosis, esophageal cancer. He tried to laugh it off, insisting it was nothing a few martinis couldn't fix, but within months the disease spread to his lungs and liver. At just 57, the world's most unflappable man was reduced to whispers. Lauren Bacall, his wife, later said, "The irony was cruel. The smoke that made him a legend also took his voice away." On January 14th, 1957, Humphrey Bogart, the ultimate man of few words, was silenced forever. 2. John Wayne, the Duke's final battle. To millions, John Wayne was America, a towering figure of grit, swagger, and conviction. Whether riding through dusty canyons or standing tall in war films, the Duke embodied rugged health and vitality. What most fans didn't know was that Wayne smoked more than 5 packs a day, sometimes lighting a fresh one before finishing the last. On film sets, he puffed through breaks, rehearsals, even while reading scripts. In 1964, at the height of his fame, Wayne was diagnosed with lung cancer. Doctors removed an entire lung and several ribs. Miraculously, he survived and even returned to acting, but the years of abuse couldn't be undone. In 1978, stomach cancer struck, and this time it didn't spare him. The Big C, as he called it, finally took the man who seemed indestructible. Yet Wayne left behind one of the most meaningful legacies, his John Wayne Cancer Foundation, which continues to fund research and awareness to this day. The Duke may have fallen, but he made sure his fight wasn't in vain. 3. Steve McQueen, the king of cool versus a fire he couldn't escape. Steve McQueen lived at full throttle, fast cars, faster motorcycles, and a cigarette constantly clutched in that famous rebellious grin. He was the great escape bullet, the getaway, the man every man wanted to be. But McQueen's on-screen cool masked a dangerous addiction. He smoked heavily, inhaled asbestos fibers from racing brake linings, and worked around asbestos insulation in his youth. By 1979, he was coughing blood. The diagnosis, mesothelioma, an aggressive cancer of the lungs linked to both asbestos and smoking. McQueen sought experimental treatments in Mexico, desperate for a miracle. In November 1980, the world lost the king of cool at just 50 years old. In a tragic twist, McQueen's death exposed how even the strongest image, the rebel, the survivor, the unstoppable hero, could be undone by an invisible killer. 4. Gary Cooper, the gentleman cowboy's last ride. He was the tall, quiet man of principle, a true gentleman both on and off the screen. Gary Cooper's effortless grace made him a Hollywood institution, but his calm demeanor hid a lifelong habit. Cooper smoked constantly, often rolling his own cigarettes. By the late 1950s, his body began to betray him. Diagnosed with prostate cancer that spread to his lungs and bones, Cooper faced his illness with the same quiet dignity that marked his films. He refused to dramatize his suffering. When close friend Ernest Hemingway heard the news, he said softly, "Old Coop's going out the way he lived, simple and clean." Gary Cooper passed away in 1961 at age 60. His final words, whispered to his wife, were almost cinematic. "I'm ready." 5. Yul Brynner, the posthumous warning. Few actors possessed the commanding presence of Yul Brynner, bald, regal, magnetic. From The King and I to The Magnificent Seven, he exuded strength and control. Off-screen, Brynner smoked relentlessly several packs of French cigarettes a day. When diagnosed with lung cancer in 1983, he faced his illness directly, even as he continued performing. Knowing his death was near, Brynner recorded a haunting public service announcement to be aired after he passed. In it, he looked straight into the camera and said, "Now that I'm gone, don't smoke. Just don't smoke." When that PSA aired posthumously in 1985, millions were stunned. It became one of the most famous anti-smoking messages in history, a man's voice echoing from beyond the grave to save others. Yul Brynner died at 65, but his message still lingers like smoke in the air. 6. William Talman, a real-life PSA. Best known as the prosecutor who always lost to Perry Mason, William Talman was beloved for his dignified screen presence. Off-screen, though, Talman was a heavy smoker, often lighting up during rehearsals. When he developed lung cancer in the 1960s, the illness progressed fast. Before his death, Talman made television history by filming a public service announcement from his hospital bed, the first ever anti-smoking PSA by a dying celebrity. His voice was weak but defiant. "If you don't smoke, don't start. If you do, quit." When the PSA aired after his death in 1968, America was stunned into silence. Talman had turned his tragedy into a warning, and in doing so became a pioneer for tobacco awareness decades ahead of his time. 7. Nat King Cole, the velvet voice silenced. Few sounds in music were as smooth as Nat King Cole's. His voice was silk and smoke blended together, an auditory luxury. Ironically, that smoky tone came with a cost. Cole smoked more than 3 packs a day, believing cigarettes kept his voice low and rich. By 1964, his health was failing. When doctors diagnosed him with advanced lung cancer, Cole continued performing, insisting he'd sing through it. But by early 1965, the cancer had spread. He died at 45, young, vibrant, and adored. Just weeks before his death, he had recorded the hopeful tune L.O.V. Its warmth made his passing even more heartbreaking. Nat King Cole's velvet voice may have faded, but his music and his lesson endures. 8. Jack Cassidy, a fire fueled by addiction. Jack Cassidy was the consummate showman, a Tony Award-winning actor with charisma that filled every room. But his demons were darker than his charm suggested. Cassidy was a chain smoker and a heavy drinker. In December 1976, after a night of drinking, he fell asleep on his couch with a cigarette still burning. The fire engulfed his Hollywood apartment. When firefighters arrived, Cassidy's body was found near the front door, just steps from safety. He was only 49. The tragedy was brutal and ironic. The very object that symbolized old Hollywood glamour had literally consumed him. 9. Richard Boone, the Western star's silent battle. With his rugged face and deep voice, Richard Boone became a TV legend in Have Gun, Will Travel. He embodied toughness and stoicism. Yet behind the scenes, Boone was rarely seen without a cigarette. In the early 1980s, he was diagnosed with throat cancer. Even as his voice weakened, Boone refused pity or publicity. "I've played dying men before," he said wryly. "Now, I just get to do it for real." He died in 1981 at 63, far from the cameras that once adored him. Boone's story remains one of quiet dignity, a man whose final performance was his own acceptance. 10. Edward G. Robinson, the voice of gangsters stilled. "Mother of mercy, is this the end of Rico?" That line from Little Caesar immortalized Edward G. Robinson as Hollywood's original tough-talking gangster. His trademark? That gravelly, smoky voice, a sound carved by years of cigarettes. Robinson smoked constantly on and off screen. By the late 1960s, his health collapsed under the weight of decades of addiction. Diagnosed with bladder cancer, strongly linked to tobacco, he kept working through treatments, determined not to let the disease define him. He died in 1973 at 79, just days after learning he'd finally won an honorary Oscar. The gangster who outlasted everyone in film couldn't outlast smoke itself. 11. John Huston, the storyteller who couldn't breathe. As a director, John Huston gave Hollywood some of its most powerful films: The Maltese Falcon, The African Queen, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. As an actor and writer, he was larger than life, whiskey glass in one hand, cigarette in the other. Huston once joked that smoking helped him think. But by the 1970s, the toll became undeniable. Decades of heavy smoking left him with chronic emphysema. By the time he directed Prizzi's Honor in 1985, he could barely breathe without an oxygen tank. Still, he never stopped creating. Huston directed his final film, The Dead, from a wheelchair, oxygen tubes running under his nose, cigarette smoke curling nearby. He died in 1987 at 81, a man who lived for art and refused to quit, even when it was killing him. For half a century, Hollywood sold the image of a cigarette as confidence, sophistication, even rebellion. But the stars who embodied that image paid the highest price. Bogart's rasp, Wayne's swagger, McQueen's defiance, all etched into memory through a haze of smoke. Yet, in the end, that same haze stole their breath, their voices, their lives. Their stories remind us of a painful truth. Fame doesn't make you immortal. It only makes your struggles public. Today, the cigarette no longer glows on screen the way it once did, but the echoes of these legends and their warnings still drift through time, whispering the same message Yul Brynner left behind. Now that I'm gone, don't smoke.